What if the fish on your child's school lunch tray was endangered shark loaded with toxic chemicals? How would you feel about that? Well, that's been the topic of article series from Mongabay News, where they uncovered thousands of tons of shark meat purchases in Brazil's public institutions. That's schools, that's elderly care facilities, and prisons. Something that is concerning is the amount of institutions. We're looking at over 5,900 institutions where they're serving shark meat. This is something that is very concerning because some of the shark meat is angel sharks, which is an endangered species, and it's mislabeled as angel fish. So you think angel fish, like you go into an aquarium and you look at angel fish, you're like, oh, okay, well, those are found on reefs and they're found in tropical areas, but we don't really know if they're endangered or not, or there's some that are and some that aren't, but it's probably fine. No, this is angel sharks, not angel fish, angel sharks, and they're being served at schools. Then we look at the public health perspective of it, and sharks are known to have elevated levels of mercury and arsenic. So there's a lot of problems with having shark as your lunch meal each and every day while you're at school. And we're going to be talking about why this is so problematic and why things need to change and what these articles have actually sparked in Brazil. It's definitely sparked a debate, and we're going to hear about it from Philip Jacobson, who is one of the journalists who covered this article. And he's here to talk about the process, how it all came to be, what he discovered during that time, and what the articles have done in Brazil in sparking this debate. On this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast, let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. This is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. On today's episode, we've got a special one for you. Normally I cover Mongabay News articles. I do that quite often. It's something that I really enjoy because Mongabay News puts out really great original articles, investigative reporting, beat reporting. It's just a lot of fun, entertaining, but also very knowledgeable. I'm learning things all the time, especially in places around the world where you don't hear about oceans, about wildlife, about forests and so forth, and it's something that's really great. Now, I am not being sponsored by Mongabay. I literally just enjoy their articles, and I'm very honored to be able to have one of the journalists, Philip Jacobson, who was spearheaded this series of articles on the shark meat that's served in Brazilian public institutions. It really sparked a topic where he looked at the procurement announcements that were happening that have to be public, they have to be transparent in Brazil, and he started going through them and started noticing specific patterns that were considered shark meat. You're going to hear about that in the interview, how he discovered that and what he wanted and where that led him into revealing what was happening in these public institutions and how much shark meat is being consumed and how non-transparent that part is. The procurement's transparent, but not what sharks are being brought in, what sharks are being consumed, how they're being consumed, and so forth. So there's a lot of things that we're going to go through in this article, and Philip Jacobson, who's a journalist at Mongabay News, who's based in Thailand, is joining us to be able to talk about. So here is the interview with Philip talking about shark meat in public institutions in Brazil. Enjoy the interview, and I will talk to you after. Hey Philip, welcome to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to talk about shark meat in Brazilian kids' lunches? This is kind of crazy. Are you ready to talk about that?
I most certainly am. Thanks so much for having me. Very happy to be here.
Oh, I'm happy to have you here, Philip. This is something that I've been excited to have because, first of all, we're going to find out in just a sec, but you are one of the journalists that work at Mongabay. Mongabay is one of my favorite internet sites that we have on environmental news. As I told you right before we recorded, we cover it a lot here on the podcast, and if anybody is on our newsletter, we see at least one Mongabay article pretty much 5 days a week. So it's always great to be able to have someone on in person. I think Eric Hoffner was the last one who was on here, but it was great to be able to have you on here because we're going to be talking about a specific story, actually a series now, a 3-part story that has an interesting result from the first 2 parts because it was just posted as we're recording today, just up today on lunch meat having shark meat. Really, it's kids are having shark meat for their lunches in Brazil, which is pretty much like I feel like from North America. That sounds really out there, but there are kids programs that have fish in it because it's such a good protein source. But this one is with shark meat in it, and I think it's interesting of what that shark meat can do. Is it really safe? We're going to find out all of that with the story and how it developed and really go through that journalistic process, which I'm really excited about because I'm very interested in that kind of stuff too. But before we begin with all that, Philip, why don't you just let us know who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Andrew. So I'm Philip Jacobson. I'm an American journalist living currently based in Thailand, Chiang Mai, Thailand, and I'm an editor and a reporter for Mongabay. Mongabay it's an environmental news site. I first joined in 2015. I was covering Indonesia at the time. I lived there for quite some time, and back then it was maybe 20 people. Today it's about 120 people. So
Incredible.
it's grown a lot. You don't see that a lot in journalism these days, but Mongabay is a nonprofit news outlet, so we get our funds from donor foundations, private donors, that sort of thing. Um, so yeah, we've got bureaus in Latin America, Africa, Southeast Asia, Indonesia. We have an oceans desk, and so yeah, so I embarked on this project. It was part of a fellowship with the Pulitzer Center,
Okay.
which is a big funder in the journalism space, and the project was investigating the global shark trade. So that's where this all started.
And that's huge. Like, I mean, that's not like a small problem. You know, we know this is an international problem. It's something worldwide. From you as a journalist, had you always wanted to be an environmental journalist or even a journalist at all?
Yeah, I mean, I came to it through journalism,
Okay.
not necessarily environmental journalism. So I grew up in Chicago, LA and Chicago, in my high school newspaper. I worked on the high school newspaper. I was editor in chief of my high school newspaper as a
Hmm.
senior. It's like it's how a lot of journalists get their start, I guess.
Yeah.
College, I majored in journalism, and then after graduation, I was looking for a job, and I wanted to live abroad.
Hmm.
So I found a job as a copy editor at the Jakarta Globe,
Okay.
which is yeah, it's an English language paper in Jakarta, Indonesia. So I went there, had that job for a year, and then I was there as a copy editor. You're reading the news every day, and it's a great introduction to a country as a journalist. You start to get a sense of the current events and the issues, and over the course of that year, I started to think if I could learn the language and kind of get out of the capital, I could. There's so many stories to report, and that's what I did. Spent a couple years freelancing. I had a part-time job with Tempo magazine, which is an Indonesian magazine. They do a lot of investigative work. And at Tempo, I started doing some environmental stories. Indonesia, it's got a ton of rainforest, a ton
Hmm.
of biodiversity. They've also got a lot of industries that are causing deforestation and biodiversity loss. Things like the palm oil industry, pulp and paper industry, that sort of thing. So I covered that a bit at Tempo, and then job at Mongabay opened up in 2015, and applied for it. Ended up getting it, and yeah, ever since I've really enjoyed working at Mongabay. It's a great place to work, and we have an opportunity to do journalism like this.
Hmm.
So yeah, I'm proud of the story, and I'm excited to talk about it.
It feels like such a unique experience to be able to do journalism abroad. You know, growing up in North America, like I live in Canada, you grew up in the States. There's this protection that is afforded to journalists. You know, if you work within North America, let's say. We've seen a lot of journalists, like I think a lot of the journalists who cover war areas, obviously there's danger in that, and we've seen it recently in different areas around the world where journalists are getting hurt. And I know from a conservation standpoint, scientists and conservationists who are doing work abroad in a lot of different countries, whether it be in South America, Central America, Southeast Asia, they don't have necessarily the protections that would be afforded to them in Canada or the U.S. if they work on specific areas. What's it like to work as a journalist that's originally from North America to go over to places like Indonesia and Thailand to do the work that you were doing? Because some of these stories that are posted on Mongabay are not necessarily like, oh, look at this country, they're doing a great job at fisheries, or they're doing a great job. Some of them are very investigative journalism pieces, and they can call out some things, that they see, that you guys see as a problem, and so forth. Are you ever worried in that case, or have you ever had any problems in those areas? In terms of like threats to your personal safety?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. Mongabay operates in a lot of different contexts, so it's kind of different depending on the country. But yeah, as you've noted, in some countries it's certainly harder to operate than others. The dynamic can shift a bit depending on if you're a foreign journalist or a national of that particular country. Foreigners can be deported,
Mm-hmm.
but locals can be messed around with in other
Mm-hmm.
ways. So sometimes you do an investigation, a company might threaten to sue you. That's happened on stories I've worked on. Um, I've never been threatened personally,
Right.
but I did spend a few days in prison once in Indonesia. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, that's
That
back in
must have been
2020.
interesting.
It was very interesting. Most interesting
Wow.
experience I never want to have again.
Yes. Let's
Um,
stay out of there.
but it was very interesting, and it's you can often work with local journalists
Hmm.
in an effective way. A foreigner and a local
Hmm.
can often be a potent combination. I came to Southeast Asia working for an English language newspaper. That is it's a way that a lot of Western journalists get into foreign correspondence. There used to be two English language newspapers in Cambodia, publications in Myanmar, Indonesia, Thailand. So it's a bit. Some of those have folded in the past couple of years, which is sad
Hmm.
because a lot of the people I know who've gone on to pretty impressive careers in foreign correspondence got their start at places like the Cambodia Daily or the Phnom Penh Post or the Jakarta Globe.
Hmm.
But certainly my friends who worked at the Cambodian publications, it would often be a foreigner and a Cambodian journalist kind of working together. So
Gotcha.
that can work pretty well. Um, and that's what we did in this story, the shark meat story. My colleague Carla Mendez, who's a really great Brazilian journalist based in Rio de Janeiro, we worked on the story together. Um, so yeah, that was a new experience for me in Brazil, but I
Yeah.
think it's possible to operate there. So
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good to hear because you just never know, right? And obviously, we don't want anybody to get hurt, and they want to be able to do your job effectively. And in this case, you're protecting, people who are vulnerable, kids, right? Which is really important. Before we get into this in particular story, something I've always been interested in is how do you develop these types of stories like on Mongabay? Because there's something different about Mongabay than your other news reports. I mean, one is it's all environmentally focused, right? It's whether it's forests like rainforests or shark meat or ocean focused or wildlife focused. It's pretty much has an environmental topic or focus, right? But it's just unique. These are original stories which are hard to come by these days, but they're deep. They're not just like, oh, I'm going to think of a topic and I'm going to just write. To be honest, I do that sometimes. Like I'll read a Mongabay news article and I'll be like, oh, I'm going to use that as a basis to talk about another particular subject. But you guys, when you put a story together, this is not a story you just think of that day and then write it. This is something, sometimes it could be months, if not years, weeks, months, years in the making to try and make this. What goes into a story that's published on Mongabay? You've been there for quite some time, over 10 years. What goes into that type of story?
sure. Well, we publish in different formats. So we publish
Mm-hmm.
short news, we publish articles, we publish longer features, and we publish investigations, videos, podcasts. But what goes into it is, I mean, just like any you know newspaper that's worth their salt is good old fashioned beat reporting, right? So
Mm.
we have reporters in these places who follow these issues for a period of time, get to know the sources involved, and develop a certain amount of knowledge about the issue. And once you do that for a certain amount of time, you start to see where the stories are, right? You start to and a story that might not be published in the form of an academic paper or a press release or an NGO report. I mean, those things can be good to cover, and we do cover those. But it's when you start to follow an issue for an extended period of time, and know the stakeholders, the people involved, that you start to see where the stories lie, that haven't been covered, that are ripe to be told. So that's what we do at Mongabay. For example, on the Southeast Asia desk, we have 4 staff reporters. There's 2 in Jakarta, there's 2 in Bangkok. We have 2 editors. We also have a network of freelancers who are pitching us stories, who we assign stories to sometimes. And we have our issues that we cover. Same with our Africa desk, or our Latin America desk, or our oceans desk, or our wildlife trade desk. So that's how we do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I really like that, because putting all this stuff into a story and being able to collaborate with others and having that geographic sort of spatial extent is pretty key, because we don't hear a lot of stories within these areas, and I think that's what makes it quite unique, which is great. Let's get into this story in particular. This is we're looking at fish for lunches for kids in Brazil. It's really shark meat. There's a lot that goes in with shark meat if they're fed to developing kids, kids who are still developing in their growth and their brain growth and a lot of growth. And we know that there's a lot of stuff that is in shark meat that is not very good if you eat it too much. And so every day sounds like a lot. So why don't you just talk a little bit about how this story really began right from the beginning, and then how it developed into this story, this 3-part series, it seems.
Sure. So I did this story as part of as I mentioned, as part of a fellowship with the Pulitzer Center, and the thrust of that proposal was to investigate the global shark trade. So one of the topics that I was interested in looking at was the rise of the shark meat industry.
Mm-hmm.
Shark meat. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of people know about shark fins.
Yes.
Shark fin soup in Asia. The practice of shark finning. I'm sure your listeners are familiar, but
we've covered it extensively.
Yeah. So you catch the shark, you cut off the fins, you throw the rest of the body back. So I wanted to look at the shark meat industry, the shark meat trade, and Brazil is a top consumer and importer of shark meat. So it made sense to look at Brazil. This is something, the fact that they're a top consumer and importer, that's well documented. People who follow this issue know that. But as I started to approach various conservationists, government people, etc., to talk about Brazil's shark meat trade and learn more about it, I started to hear about government procurements as happening. And this is something I'd see it had been mentioned in published studies and articles. My colleague Carla had interviewed somebody who mentioned it. So it's not something that was completely hidden, but it was never expounded on in any depth or length. It was always just kind of an offhanded mention in the middle of some study, in the middle of some article. So I thought that could be an interesting angle, right? I mean, if they're serving it in schools or hospitals and that kind of thing. But how do you show that this is happening? Mm-hmm. How do you approach this journalistically? So as I talked to a few people who mentioned to me that Brazil has a transparency law. Brazil has a transparency law which requires government agencies to publish procurement data, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're the education department in city X, you've got to publish all the calls for tender that you issue, right? If you say, I want to buy 1,000 pounds of chicken for the local hospital, that goes on a website somewhere.
Yeah.
So a few people mentioned, hey, if you have a lot of time on your hands, you could probably hunt around some of these websites, and you'll find shark meat procurements. So
because you had all that time.
Start to think, well, this is I do have a year for this fellowship, and
yeah.
So that's what we did basically.
Yeah.
that's what we did. That was kind of the premise of this investigation. So, um, I'd done a story like that before in Indonesia, where you go on a bunch of government websites and you build a database of, in that case, it was court cases. That was a story about traditional farmers on the island of Borneo getting criminally prosecuted for using fire to clear land. It's a big issue there. It caused a lot of air pollution. So,
Yeah.
we built a database of those prosecutions. So this was, in a way, it was similar. We thought, okay, we can build a database of shark meat procurements. So it sounds straightforward, but there were a lot of difficulties. It's not a lot of reasons why it's not so straightforward. One of which is that there's no central. It's not like there's one website you can go on to find all the procurements in Brazil. Every state has its own website, transparency portal. Every city has its own transparency portal. There's a federal transparency portal. There's thousands of cities in Brazil, so it's like, how do you approach this? So we thought, okay, let's pick 4 states, start there. And so one of the authors of this story, one of the bylines on this story is my colleague Kang. He's the data editor at the Pulitzer Center. So I worked very closely with him we tried to figure out a way to scrape these websites, right? So he used his magical coding abilities to build these bots that would go on these portals and try to scrape shark meat procurements. So we did that for 4 states. It was the state of Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Minas Gerais, and what was the other one? I think it was Paraná. And of course, I'm mangling the pronunciations of some of those. But so that's what we did. I mean, that's what we did. And there was a lot of manual labor that was involved in there, having to verify what the robots gave us. And we also went on a lot of city municipal transparency portals to find more shark meat tenders. So that's kind of in a nutshell. I can go into more detail about that process, but that was kind of the meat of the investigation. And then we, of course, once we identified all these shark meat tenders, we sought to contact the agencies that were buying the shark meat, the public institutions that were receiving the shark meat, the companies that were supplying the shark meat, all that kind of thing. And one of the reasons why it wasn't so straightforward is that shark meat in Brazil, it's not actually sold under the label shark meat. It's called something else. It has this generic label. It's called cação. So cação is like, it's a common suffix in Portuguese. Okay. It's like in English, it would be like, cation, like vacation or convocation. So it's just that cation, So it's sold under the name cação, and because it's a suffix, like it becomes really hard to search these portals for cação, because you search cação, it actually brings up anything with the word that has that in it. It's not these aren't very sophisticated search platforms like Google. You generally can't ask them to. So that presented a whole host of issues we had to overcome.
Oh man, that's a lot.
But
that does mess it up. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of the basics of how we approach the data gathering exercise.
Now, further along into the story, do the children and rightfully the parents know that they're having shark meat?
That's a good question. I think the answer is almost always no. People don't know that cação is shark for the most part in Brazil. Right. There's surveys that show that most people who buy cação don't know that it's actually shark. Right. And this is a common thing in fish, right? Yeah. So it's not widely known. These packages don't have labels that say like this is shark. The word for shark in Portuguese is tubarão. And that's typically not on the labels. There's typically not a species name or anything like that. So people don't know. And so one of the people who was featured in the article is a woman who her name is Solange Bergami, and she's an educator in a city that's in the Rio de Janeiro metropolitan area, and she's also president of the municipal school feeding council, which kind of has a role in the meal program for schools in that city. So she she told us a story about how maybe around 4 years ago, she noticed that kids, weren't eating the cação, which was served every Monday. Um, and she started to look into it, and it was only when she went home and did some research that she realized that cação was shark. And she starts to read, some of the studies out there that say shark meat, tends to be high in heavy metals like mercury
Yeah.
and arsenic, right? Because sharks are apex predators that bioaccumulate
Right.
these substances in their tissues. So, and she became concerned, and so she, over the past few years, has been trying to get the municipal education department in this city to remove cação from the school meal program, replace it with a different fish. They want to be serving fish. There's a program in Brazil to get people to eat more fish. It's seen as healthy and a source of fish protein and all that.
Yeah.
But she wanted them to stop serving cação, and to this day she's been unable to do so. One thing that we heard a lot from the government officials that we talked to, the government nutritionists that draw up these menus, which inform these procurements, is that shark meat is appealing because it doesn't have bones. So so this boneless flesh is it's appealing to people in places like Brazil, who are quite often concerned with choking on bones. They're afraid that a kid's going to choke on a bone. Parents are going to sue the school, that kind of a thing. Kids going to go to the hospital. So, I mean, for me, that was surprising because I grew up, I haven't really heard that in the US. I grew up eating fish, bones was never like that kind of a concern. But in the reporting for this project, something I've heard from people in a lot of countries where maybe fish consumption isn't such a normal thing. People are afraid of choking on bones. So that's a big reason for the appeal of serving sharks to kids, especially kids. But as we know, heavy metals like mercury and arsenic can affect, they can affect anybody if you eat enough of it.
Yep.
According to the science. But kids especially, like the developing brains, they can affect, those substances can affect developing brains even more and more quickly than somebody who eats it X amount of times per week over the course of a lifetime. So
yeah, I think the famous case out of that was an actor, Jeremy Piven, who was in Entourage and many other shows and movies, where I think he was like a piscivore because he just ate sushi every day for like decades. And when he went in to get his blood tested, they were like, "We don't know how you're alive," because he had so much mercury in his system, and they had to like do almost like a I don't know the term, but it was a blood transfusion where they had to replace a lot of his blood because there was so much mercury, and he was in the hospital for quite some time. And so that's like one of the famous things, and that's eating it every day. Obviously, it's an extreme because not everybody eats fish every day. But if you're a child and you're eating it 5 times a day and you're developing, like, what are the age groups of the children that are eating this meat?
It's as young as it gets, man. It's because the bonelessness is part of the appeal. Yeah, even younger,
Really?
like early childhood education.
Yeah.
And yes, primary school, like kindergarten, first grade.
Right.
In our investigation, that was a question that we asked, like how, I think we identified 5,900 institutions, like individual schools or hospitals that were listed as potential recipients of shark meat in these tenders that we identified. Most of them were schools.
Yeah.
And we found at least more than 1,000 early childhood schools.
Interesting. Wow.
So yeah, I mean, not just small children, but also some elderly care centers.
Yeah.
There was an agency in Rio de Janeiro that told us they were buying shark meat for a shelter for disabled kids with intellectual disabilities. They saw it as as good for those kids because maybe they have a harder time chewing. So the boneless meat was seen as appealing for those kids.
Just because it was boneless meat at this point.
Yeah,
like that's
exactly
the major difference. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's very widely adopted in Brazil. I mean, it's not just restaurants, it's not just supermarkets. And I walked around. I was in Sao Paulo, and I just wanted to see how widespread it was. I think I went to 25, 30 grocery stores, supermarkets, convenience stores, and I think almost all of them had shark meat on sale in the frozen food section, sometimes in the fresh food section. So it's
Yeah.
Sao Paulo is a place where it's very commonly served. It's interesting because Sao Paulo, they have a lot of vegetarian restaurants. It's known for having like amazing vegan vegetarian food, but it's also, I suppose, known for having a lot of shark meat on offer. So
Interesting. I wonder if that's the case. Like if there are people who are mostly vegetarian, but will take protein, a lot of the times it's some sort of seafood or fish, right? That I've seen anecdotally. I don't know if that's like widely known, but people who are vegetarian who aren't fully vegetarian, but they'll eat, because a lot of people like, well, I'm vegetarian, but I eat fish, and so like they still get the healthy, they get the good proteins and the fatty acids and so forth, and the minerals and stuff. But I wonder if that's a reason why as well. It's so popular there.
Yeah, I wonder. I don't know. I don't know where this term cação comes from even.
Yeah.
Why that took hold. I've heard various things, but nothing really solid. So yeah, it's an interesting question.
Yeah, yeah. Now, like when we talk about having, like, why are we worried about this story? Really, like, people eat fish, people eat sharks. We know sometimes there's fraud, but it sounds like, there's like seafood fraud, but it sounds like, people, like the government is putting it up as a procurement. People are buying this. A lot of people know they're buying sharks. The kids may not know, and the parents may not know they're eating sharks. But why is this? Let's talk about like the issues, like from a public health perspective. Why is this an issue?
Yeah, sure. So why are we concerned about thousands of tons of shark meat being bought by government agencies in a country like Brazil? So there's really two sides of it. One side is the public health side, which we touched on. We can talk about that some more. The presence of heavy metals in these fish. The other side is sustainability, right? So sharks are, generally speaking, are declining across the world. There was a study that showed that shark abundance has declined by like 71% over the past 50 years. So, sharks are being overfished. Sharks are in trouble. And shark meat is a growing industry, and that is driving the overfishing of sharks. So when you identify kind of this hidden driver of the shark meat industry in the form of widespread government procurements in one of the biggest countries in the world, which also, by the way, could be happening in other countries. Other countries' governments, I've heard, could be procuring shark meat, maybe not on the same scale as Brazil, but I've heard Portugal, right. I've heard some other places as well. That is, an issue worth considering. Now, look, I'm not going to tell anybody, you can never ever eat shark, right? People have been eating sharks since probably the beginning of human history. Right. We humans eat a lot of things. I lived for 8 years in Indonesia. There's a place in Indonesia, in the northern part of the island of Sulawesi, where they're known to eat just about anything. I think the saying there is if it crawls, swims, flies, or walks, we eat it. So, I'm not gonna say nobody should ever eat shark. Some people would say that. But as a journalist, I'm not gonna say that. But what's happened is there's been a shift from this traditional shark meat consumption, right? Like traditional villages here and there, indigenous peoples here and there, to what we have today, which is this big industrial scale fishing of sharks and consumption of shark meat. So, to the extent where you have hundreds of companies in Brazil that are involved in the distribution of shark meat, which we show in our investigation. I think we identified somewhere between 200 and 250 companies that were supplying government agencies. Those are only the tenders that we compiled. So, this has become a massive global industry. Shark meat, I think, is worth hundreds of millions of dollars a year, according to the WWF study published in, I think, 2021. So it's big business. It's a massive industry. And, I think at the very least, what a lot of people will say is that there should at the very least be clear labeling on these products, right?
Yeah.
So some of the nutritionists who put cação on the menu, they didn't even know that cação was shark. They didn't know about the toxicology. They don't study toxicology in Brazilian nutritionist school, and they didn't know about the sustainability issues. It was all news to them. So I think at the very least, we should be making informed decisions about these kinds of foods. Maybe there is a way to sustainably fish shark and harvest their meat and serve their meat in public institutions. But I think a prerequisite for that should certainly be clear labeling, at least knowing what we're dealing with. And that, by the way, is an issue in shark fishing more broadly. I mean, the data is not very good for some of these species. Like it's hard. We don't really know the status of some of these species that we're fishing. The blue shark is the species that is the most commonly traded in the world today. That's a big oceanic shark. I'm sorry. Did I?
Nope, you're all good.
Okay, I'm sorry. I minimized my window, but you're still there. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sorry about that. So the blue shark is the most commonly traded species. It's the industry will say that the industry will argue that it's possible to sustainably fish the blue shark. Some conservationists will counter that. The data on blue sharks isn't that good. We don't really know how they're doing. We don't maybe have the data showing that they're not doing very good, but we also don't have data showing that they're doing really well. Yeah. So we should maybe take the precautionary approach. So that's a debate that's happening right now in the regional fisheries management organizations, the RFMOs, in national governments, national settings like Brazil. I mean, sharks are really, I think, at a crossroads right now globally, in Brazil, in a number of other countries, Spain, Ecuador, Costa Rica, in the RFMOs. People are just, I think, starting to realize that these big shark fishing industries exist, where boats are not only catching sharks as bycatch, but are actually targeting sharks industrially. And this has been going on for a long time now, 20, 30 years, and it's been largely unregulated, right?
Yeah.
There's most places you can take as many blue sharks as a boat can go take as many blue sharks as they want. There's no rules for it. No. It's not like tuna and swordfish. They're managed with quotas and seasons and gear and stuff like that. Sharks just bycatch, right? So we can go take as many as we want. And now we're sitting here in 2025. Sharks have gone down by 71% the past 50 years. And people are starting to wake up to this. Blue sharks are now on Appendix 2 of CITES. And there are debates about, can we fish sharks sustainably? What does that look like? How do we regulate it? Should we regulate it? That kind of thing. So, it's a rich vein.
And to add to that too, sharks are such a dynamic species or type of species because you have a lot of different sharks. We've identified now, I think we've grown from 450 to, over 1,200 elasmobranchs, looking at shark skates, rays, and chimeras. But when you look at even like the blue shark, some areas they're well managed in that they have quotas and that you look at them and we know their population size, but even there we don't have enough information. We only have some information. There's a lot of sharks where we just don't have any information at all, and people are still catching them on a regular basis. We get most of our information from the fishers who are fishing them because they're the ones who are catching them. I co-host another podcast called the Beyond Jaws podcast with Dr. David Ebert, and he's known as a lost shark guy. He looks for a lot of these sharks who haven't been seen in a long time, and most of the time he finds them at the fish markets because that's where they go, talking to other fishermen. And if we don't have the information on those species, how are we supposed to find them? Or even how are we supposed to manage the species that we can find? Because people are not looking at this type of species, which makes it even more concerning when you're seeing, as you mentioned, over 5,000 institutions in Brazil who are ordering shark meat on a regular basis to feed it to the people that they care for, whether it be students, whether it be elderly, whether it be patients as in hospitals. It's a very difficult thing to do, and if already looking at the degradation of shark populations around the world, which is really one of the things one of the reasons why I want to have you on. You mentioned at the beginning most people know about shark finning, but and the problems that finning is producing, but a lot of times we ignore shark meat and just shark fishing in general. And there are some, and you can say you may be able to argue there are some populations of species that are of shark that are well managed, but those are in very small, like those are in very spotted. And I know there's some in the U.S., but even then there's arguments that they're not as well managed as everybody thinks, because it's never fully perfect. But when you're not managing them, and you're not looking at their numbers, and you're not seeing how they're going to do, and you're selling this meat as like as like it's nothing, like it's infinite. We know it's not infinite, and it scares the hell out of me from a conservation standpoint that we are not, monitoring this further or monitoring this more. Now, when you first wrote this article, it came in two parts, right? Was that the goal? Was it's going to be two parts?
Yeah. So the initial goal was just one story.
Okay.
One story about, Brazilian government procurements of shark meat. But then something else emerged. So as I'm going through these procurement portals, these websites where the government agencies are listing the procurements and just kind of combing through them, searching for cação, 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 I noticed that in one state, in Brazil's southernmost state, Rio Grande do Sul, which is on the border with Uruguay. It's got a big fishing industry. They eat a lot of seafood down there. I was seeing tenders for something else called peixe anjo. Peixe anjo, maybe it's pronounced in Portuguese. So that's translates as angel fish. Angel fish.
Angel fish.
So I at first I didn't think much of it, but I started to see it. And I was like, what is this angel fish? I mean, because the aquarium fish, right? Like the angel fish.
Yeah.
Like do people eat
There's
that?
a lot of different names. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so it's like, well, no, it can't be that. I mean, there's no industry that's producing angelfish, for consumption like this on an industrial scale. It's just not done. So angelfish, what could that be? So in one of these tenders, even though what they were asking for was angelfish, peixe anjo, there was a supporting document that made clear that angelfish was actually angel shark. So that was very interesting. So
when you first saw like angel fish, and then all of a sudden you realize that it's not fish, it's like a type of shark. What was your reaction to that?
At first, I was like, this can't be asking for angel shark because they're endangered, right? That would just seem. In Brazil, like it's illegal to. You can't catch endangered species. You can't catch angel shark, even if they're dead. You have to throw it back, and you can't trade angel shark unless there is an exemption that you can trade an endangered species if it is imported. So, okay, maybe there's maybe it could be legal. But I mean, when I first saw this, I was kind of, I don't know. So I had to ask a bunch of people. But eventually it did become clear that no, this peixe anjo is a reference to angel shark. There was just a lot of evidence that we found. It's explained in the article. One of the tenders, there was a supporting document that made clear that peixe anjo was actually cação anjo, which that is the official trade name for angel shark in Brazil. So the Ministry of Agriculture, regulates the official trade names for like food in Brazil. And so these species, these three species of angel shark that are native to Brazil, they have like official trade names, and it's always cação anjo something, cação anjo something. I'm totally mangled the pronunciation.
No, but I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, this is cação anjo. So this is angel shark. There's no doubt about it, at least in this tender. So we dug around a little bit. We found, there was a document, I think it was some museum archive that showed that peixe anjo was a common name for angel shark in Rio Grande do Sul. There was another thing that we found that I think I'm going to mangle this because it's from memory, but it was some government document that was kind of further indicating that anjo was actually angel shark.
Okay.
And it's being sold openly. I mean, in restaurants, in markets in this state, peixe anjo, and sometimes it is, and rarely it is. Sometimes it's called cação anjo, like on the label on the product in like a store or whatever. So, so that kind of became clear. Okay, peixe anjo is a reference to angel shark. That doesn't mean that when they're procuring peixe anjo, what they're getting is always angel shark. I mean, that was something that experts I interviewed said it's like, the suppliers could be supplying something else. It could be a different kind of shark. It could be guitar fish or something like that. Even with cação, there could be endangered species getting into this supply chain as cação. Yeah, we don't know because it's just cação.
Yeah.
'cause it might be blue shark, which is legal, but it might be another species which is not
I mean,
legal to trade.
unless you have a DNA sampler right then and there to like sample randomly the meat, you will really never know, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I mean, there's been a lot of studies in the past several years, like genetic studies where a scientist will go take some meat that's being sold at the supermarket and they'll do this genetic test to see what species it is. And quite often cação is like hammerhead sharks or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
So it's a common issue. But to see angel sharks being kind of like openly procured like this was very surprising, very, very surprising. Um, so either it's being imported legally or it is being illegally caught in Brazil and then kind of laundered into this supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't know. It was kind of beyond the scope of our investigation, but
Right.
we learned from Brazil's environment agency. It's called IBAMA. IBAMA, they're trying to crack down on the illegal angel shark trade, and they've actually asked the Environment Ministry to close that exemption that allows imported endangered species to be traded because it kind of creates an opportunity to launder this
Yeah.
illegally caught Brazilian angel shark into these supply chains. So it's really hard to trace these supply chains because
And we don't know
of
the
what you
portion of it either. Like we don't know the proportion of how much angel shark was coming in this situation, right? Because it could have been under the cação name too. Like
That's
we don't
true.
know, right?
That's definitely true. Yeah. So the import data is not always clear about that kind of stuff.
Right.
It's not really. It's a shark is coming in. It's not usually not this divided by species.
Yeah.
So
It sounds like someone
yeah,
can do a PhD just on the translation and identification of the supply chain stuff that's coming through, just imported into Brazil or probably any country where we don't know the actual names, because it's not as if they're importing by name of species. They're just kind of like, it sounds like just a random general category that people are importing these sharks under, and until we know different, we don't know if it's just all blue sharks or how much is angel shark or anything like that, right?
yeah. The
Yeah.
trade data is really tough to work with for that reason. I think every country does it differently.
Yeah.
I'm not totally expert on all that trade data stuff, but there's a project right now at Dalhousie University in
Yeah.
Canada.
Dalhousie. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're trying to map out the global shark meat trade, and they've got their own methods for trying to work
Right.
through these inconsistencies in the trade data
Yeah.
from country to country and entity to entity. So that'll
Yeah.
be interesting when that comes out.
Yeah, it'll open up the transparency for sure. I mean, that's something that's needed in all fisheries, especially shark fisheries, where we just don't have the information. And being able to have this is great, but definitely surprising in this case. Now, you did these first two articles. So the first one was on the I just sort of the revelation of the fact that these institutions. So it's not. I kept saying schools, but it's not only schools, hospitals, and even jails, to prisons as well, right? Like that people are eating sharks on a regular basis. The second one was really identifying like how illegal angel shark captures were being used also in these school lunches. There was a third one that was published today, as of this recording, August 26th. Can you talk about what that was? It was a bit of a response letter to it's kind of like an update of what's been happening because of the first two articles, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we just published this piece an hour ago.
Yeah.
It's basically
Great
a
timing,
reaction
by the
story.
way. Great timing.
Yeah, yeah. No, I was glad to get it out before coming on here. But yeah, it's basically a reactions piece. I mean, there's been some reaction in Brazil to the investigation that we published. There's a member of the national parliament who he's actually introduced a bill a couple years ago to ban federal procurements of shark meat. Our investigation was more focused on the state and municipal level,
Okay.
which is there's vastly more shark meat procurements at that level we seemingly.
Right.
But so he he read the story and he said he was going to call for a parliamentary hearing to discuss findings.
Nice.
Some other government agencies responded saying they'd look into some of this stuff. There's some industry commentary kind of pushing back against some of the points that were raised in the article, mainly to do with the heavy metals aspect. So, we covered that. We covered the statements that they put out and what scientists are saying. I think it's a really interesting debate,
Yeah.
about the heavy metals issue. I'm not a scientist, so, I'm going to the scientists, to the
Yeah,
industry
of course.
people and trying to understand. But, the article that we put out is talks about arsenic as one of the ones that appears in sharks sometimes. The first story that we put out talked a bit about mercury. It's another common one. So the industry, will argue that, these concerns about heavy metals are overblown.
Yeah. Yeah.
Shark meat is really healthy because it has, it's protein, omega-3 fatty acids, that kind of thing. Um, they'll make various arguments about mercury and about arsenic, which are recounted in the articles, and we kind of go back and we kind of present the debate.
Mm-hmm.
So, I could get into some of that stuff here if you want, nuts and bolts of that, but that's in the article that we just published. There's also a Portuguese conservationist who she's quoted in the story saying that there's a lot of Portuguese government shark meat procurements, which I didn't know. And there's a transparency portal in Portugal where I guess you can go and you can search for shark meat procurement. So maybe that's something we should follow up on, or maybe
Right.
if there's a Portuguese journalist out there who wants to write about this, we can work together, or you can just do a story. I think this is something that's bigger than just Brazil. It's worth asking, to what extent are these government purchases driving the shark meat trade globally?
Mm-hmm.
It's in a way it's like government subsidizing the shark meat trade.
Yeah.
It's cheap. It's cheap meat. The fins are expensive. The meat is cheap. And that's, I think, the other part of the big appeal. The other big appeal, besides the bonelessness, is the low price. So
Yeah. How do you feed a mass amount of people with the cheapest meat ever?
Exactly.
Doesn't mean it's the best meat, but it's the cheapest meat, and if that works for them, right?
Yeah. We talked to the former mayor of a city in Sao Paulo state, who was involved in some of these procurements. He's actually the head of IBAMA now, which is interesting. But when he was mayor in the 2010s, he signed off on some shark meat procurements, and not just shark meat, also ray meat, for schools. And I think maybe hospitals, shelters. I can't remember in that particular city, but he said that, at the time he tried to push back against it, to really want to be serving shark, but the nutritionists who dropped the menus, were basically like, you're going to tell me how to do my job, kind of thing. So, it's interesting. So the way the system works is, it's government agencies in Brazil. They employ nutritionists who drop the menus for food procurements, right?
Mm-hmm.
Basically design the procurements. And so it all goes back to the nutritionists. There's thousands of nutritionists in Brazil. And, they don't know that in a lot of cases, I mean, the ones we talked to, I can't say for all of them, but it seems like at least the ones we talked to seem to not know that cação was shark, and then to know about the heavy metals issue. So, I forgot what I was talking about for a second. It was the mayor.
Yeah, the mayor. Yeah. I feel like it's interesting when all this develops, right? You do the first two articles, you get all this response. Did you expect this type of response from the like a federal a federal politician as well as industry? Because that means it must make a splash. I mean, people must be reading this stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's always what you want to see, right? As a journalist, right. you want to know that it's being read, and So I don't know if I was totally shocked to see this kind of response. I mean, I kind of knew going into this that this was a big issue, and just the scale of it, the fact that it's happening all over the country. I mean, before we put out this story, there's really nothing on government procurements of shark meat anywhere. I hadn't found any report, any article, any study anywhere. That was part of, when we're going into this, like, is this something we want to spend a lot of time on? Because it could take some time, but that was part of the calculus for us, right? So that kind of made it worth doing. And so I wasn't totally shocked to see responses like that. It's a little unfortunate, I think, to see kind of maybe some hostile responses from some quarters of the industry. Not totally surprising.
Right.
But, you try to engage in good faith. I interviewed people on the fishing side, on the trading side, on the fishing and trading, right? People in like import export. So I feel like I've got a pretty good understanding of the issues, of the arguments on both sides. It's something we definitely want to keep covering in Brazil and elsewhere. And hopefully it continues to be, relevant to the debates that people are having in these places.
I think you've identified a lot, in terms of what needs to be further done. I think we're looking at the transparency of a supply chain, identifying these categories that things are being imported to, but there's no sort of manifesto on the, like, which species are being used. Is it all blue sharks? Is it not blue sharks? A call for like looking after the stock of where these, we don't even know where these sharks are caught. We probably know it's the Atlantic, but we don't know where they're caught otherwise. It almost seems to be like a DNA test needs to be done to find out the variety of different sharks, if there's a variety of different shark species that are being consumed on this, and if so, are they being managed? Are they not? What's their status? All this stuff. We know there's angel shark that's being used, and that's already endangered. So we're looking already at endangered species being procured and being eaten. And then there's also the safety aspect of the people who are consuming this. Some of them don't have a choice. Actually, none of them really have a choice. It's just offered as part of the thing. And parents need to know about this as well, for schools, advocates for jails and looking after the elderly, like their kids need to make sure that the people who are eating this stuff are going to be safe, and I know there are studies out there that looking at the effects of, increased arsenic and mercury in the body is not good, especially from consuming seafood. That's something that needs to be looked at. So there seems to be a lot of things that need to go on. And I know you've just posted the article, the follow-up article, like the response article. You mentioned that, something that to look into is looking into Portugal and their transparency portal and what's in there. What would you think should the next step should be in developing this story in Brazil? To like, are you hoping that with the publication, you and your co-authors with this publication, that there's going to be some change, or it's going to at least spark a debate that looks at, whether the people of Brazil want this?
Yeah, so there's a few ways it could go in Brazil. So we have this bill that's been introduced by this national parliament member that would ban federal procurements of shark meat. So we'll see what happens with that. But shark meat procurements are happening at the state level and at the municipal level. So Brazil has like 30, I think it's 26 or 36 states, thousands, like 5,000, 6,000 cities. So, that's something that would have to get addressed by these different jurisdictions. So it doesn't necessarily mean banning shark meat procurements. For example, the state of Paraná, they passed a rule that any shark meat sold in the state has to be clearly labeled with the species name. So you can't just sell it as cação in Paraná. You have to sell it as, Priones glauca if it's blue shark, or whatever it is, squatna if it's angel shark. So, that's a transparency measure that could, at least, if you're going to sell it, at least enables the consumer to understand what it is that they are buying and consuming. So that's something that, a lot of people we interviewed mentioned as something that could or should be done. So Paraná's done that. I mean, I think a couple years ago, there was the Sao Paulo city administration issued a tender for some huge amount of shark meat. I think it was like 650 tons of shark meat for schools across the state. That actually made headlines at the time. There was some civil society pushback against that. The NGO Sea Shepherd was, raising a fuss about that. A lot of other, concerned people were up in arms about it. There was some media coverage, and that resulted in the city canceling the tender.
Right.
In that instance. So, it does come to light in a city here or there, but, I thought it was important to produce this article because it shows that it's not just one city here, one city there. It's really a nationwide thing.
Yeah.
So, we published the data along with the article. There's a spreadsheet of the 1,000 tenders that we found. That took a long time to put together. The reason why we put the time into doing that was so if any local media in Brazil want to follow this up, they can, for writing for their city newspaper or their state newspaper, they can do that. And, there's going to be a lot of tenders out there that we didn't find. This wasn't a comprehensive. We didn't identify every tender that's ever been issued for shark meat. 1,000 of them there's going to be a lot more than that. So local journalists could follow up, maybe find some more tenders if that's relevant to them and they want to do that. But I think it's something that could, there's more to be done. There's more to be reckoned with. There's also on the fishing side a debate happening in Brazil about whether targeted blue shark fishing should be allowed. That's a whole nother side of it.
Yeah.
And that's not just happening in Brazil, it's happening in other countries as well. Yeah. So that's also really interesting.
And I should say, and I know this is a feature article, like the original one, there's a lot of detail in this. Even one, I think you did like a dot matrix kind of analysis, or looking at like these bar graphs with each dot representing one unique recipient on this thing. It's really cool to like scroll through. So the article is really great. I highly recommend everybody who's listening to this to go read the article, because like there's so much information in this, and we'll link to all three so that people can get can be able to read them all and go through them all. I think it's something that's needed, and there's so many. It opens up so many doors to research, not only from a journalist perspective, but I think also from a conservation and science perspective, to really understand the shark meat market internationally, not just in Brazil, but internationally. So Philip, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing this with us, this important article. Once I started to read this, I was like, we have to have Phil on the show to talk about this. So I want to thank you so much, and I'd love to have you back on, not only to talk about this, but other articles that you've written related to the ocean.
Thanks so much. It means a lot to get that nice feedback, and really had a good time talking with you, and I'm happy to come on again.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Philip, for joining us on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. It was so great to have you on. What a story. Something that we don't realize. Even Philip mentioned, we know a lot about finning. We don't know a lot about how shark meat is being consumed in various countries, how non-transparent the supply chain is when we look at sharks. He mentioned there's a specific topic or name for shark meat that's coming in, but we don't know the actual species. Those aren't identified. We don't know if it's different species. We don't know if it's one single species. And we don't know if there are many more endangered species in there, just like angel sharks. So there's a lot to be uncovered. There's a lot of work to do to make sure that these papers, these documents are more transparent, making sure that we understand what species is being caught, what species is being sold, is allowed to be sold. There are a lot of regulations that need to happen. It seems like the federal government is on par with doing something about it. However, the state or regional governments, as well as the local governments and municipal governments, aren't really at that stage yet. And that's where a lot of the purchasing is happening, according to Philip, and that is concerning. There's a lot more to manage, whereas like if you have a federal law that says that this is how it's going to be regulated, maybe it'll be easier to move down. I don't know what the political system is like in Brazil. I don't know how much the federal laws have influence on the state and local levels, but they always could have some level. But it would be great to see some kind of regulation, some kind of transparency in those regulations, or demand for transparency in those regulations, even a requirement, not even demand, a requirement for transparency in those regulations to make sure that we know what species is being caught. That's the first thing. Like, information is key. Monitoring is key. If we don't have that information, we cannot monitor, we cannot conserve. And that's a big part of that. As Philip mentioned, there's people at Dalhousie University who are working on that. There are people all over the world who are working on that in different countries. And it seems like there's a lot of work to do. A great chance for people to do a PhD or a master's degree on it, or a master project on it, because this is something that is necessary, and it's something that hasn't really been done in certain areas before, and it's something that needs to be done just so that we can understand how these sharks are being consumed, how they're being shipped all over the world, how they're being caught, where they're going, all that kind of stuff. It's something that needs to be done. And I'm glad that this article came out. I'm glad that we can look at it in the future, and I'm looking forward to seeing what happens. So thank you again to Phil to be able to come on the podcast and talk about this. And thank you, the audience member, for listening. If you have any questions or comments, let us know in the YouTube comments below. Or if you're listening to this on your favorite podcast app, you can go and you want to comment or have a question, please let me know. You can hit me up on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean. Just DM me. That's at How to Protect the Ocean. Or you can go to speakupforblue.com/contact, and you can just fill out the form. It goes right to my email. I'd love to hear from you. But thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, from the True North Strong and Free. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.